many of you probably know Humana, but I want to jump right in and maximize our time here. So I'm going to ask for some name, rank, serial number, and Heather, I'll start with you. Who are you? Give us a little bit of background about your remit, and maybe just let folks know a little bit more about Humana. They may know Humana as an insurance provider, but it's a very interesting company. But it's great to have you here, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Drew. And I appreciate the invitation to be here today. Antonio and I are both excited to speak with you. And Heather Cox, I actually joined Humana nearly 3 years ago to build a new organization called Digital Health and Analytics. It's the first kind of organization of its kind in healthcare. And we're super excited about the strategy and the execution against the strategy and the real progress and momentum we've been able to create in this new space. One of the bright silver linings of COVID, while there were definitely a few, one was that the space that Antonio and I and many of our colleagues work in really kind of hit that hockey stick. And we had incredible progress that's been made over the last 12 months as it relates to digital health in particular. So very exciting. I joined Humana after 25 plus years in financial services. So it was a big right turn, left turn. I'm not really sure which yet, but it was a big move for me and a big change. But I'm excited to see that my skills and my expertise has translated nicely from one industry to another. And I'm really enjoying the chance to impact health outcomes in America. It's been a really great opportunity. Humana is well known as an insurance company, so financing vehicle for your healthcare. But in addition, we are one of the largest provider systems in the country. And as an example, pre-COVID, we had 80,000 nurses every single day going into people's homes and across America. And so we have a lot of hands-on care and a lot of health outcomes that we impact every day. So I'm very excited.
That's great. Well, thanks for starting off by taking a triple layered question, by the way. Antonio, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to see you, Drew, as well as you, Heather. I know we're all in different locations. I'm Antonio Melo, and I'm part of Heather's leadership team at Digital Health and Analytics, and I lead one of the divisions known as the Experience Center, which you can think of simply as a human-centered applied innovation function. And, I think with the preamble that Heather provided, something that we're continuing to try to understand is that intersection between, how do we apply digital and analytics in a relevant and helpful fashion to the people that we have privilege of serving. And certainly we are nascent on that journey, but optimistic with our ability to continue to learn and refine our series of offerings.
No, that's great. And we're certainly going to dive in a little bit into data. And there were some laws passed last year. We'll get to those in a little bit and look forward to getting some insights from both of you on that and then how that might affect Humana's products and services moving forward. To start, I always, like to dig in a little bit on the last year. And Heather, I'll start with you. And we all know about the pandemic. We know how it materially impacted all of our lives. I'm curious, from your purview at Humana and then for you personally, just in terms of what you learned in terms of managing your teams, what you learned in terms of the resilience of the company, and as we sit here 14 months later, hopefully making our way out of it, sort of what's top of mind for you today. So I guess I'm throwing you another triple layered question.
Yeah, no kidding. Let me parse through that.
answer what you like, but just your reflections on the past year.
Yeah. I'll start with one, just what I've learned as a leader. And, obviously communication is always important, but what I have found is the communication over the last year has just amped up in importance, and trying to find new and different ways, a weekly podcast, weekly letters, and, not about the status of the business or the results, but more about what I'm thinking about, sharing context for things that are happening around all of us and wanting to dig in on tough topics. I've also, given the social uprisings that happened over the course of the last year, I will tell you, I hit one of those moments in my career as well, where a real growth opportunity. I really did not understand some of the depth in particular on the conversations around race and work in the workplace. I wasn't comfortable with it. I didn't know how to do it. And yet it was such an important thing to be leaning in and addressing, especially when we were all so far apart, right? And needing to feel that sense of community. And so, I feel like I've learned as a leader over the last year, which is great. You sometimes go on, I would call them droughts of not really growing as in your leadership.
Yeah.
And so felt like that was a great opportunity. I would also say, we had an incredible response to COVID as it relates to our associates, right? Keeping everyone safe was the absolute number one priority. Many, many companies did the same thing, most did. But the way that we at Humana really focused on our members and making sure that we were creating the right environment for them, I think just stands out. And I'm proud of things like the kits that we sent to our members with the green Humana masks, which I can bet that just about everybody has seen one at some point or another out on the street.
Yeah.
What we were hearing from our members is they were afraid to go to the grocery store to go get food. They were afraid to go to the doctor. And so they were social distancing their doctor when they have chronic conditions. And so finding ways to get hand sanitizers to them, get masks so that they can wear to feel more secure. In addition, as we were talking to our members, it was becoming very clear, and we have a large Medicare population, Medicare Advantage population. And so these are older adults, 65 and over, and they were lonely and they were struggling with food insecurity. And so as a part of this, we really learned more about the way our members live. And as a result, we were able to really focus on what do they need most. So on top of things like the safety packages, we delivered over 1 million meals to our members over the course of the last year, helping them stay safe, stay healthy, and until they could get back to their doctor, offering things like telehealth and providing them devices if they didn't have them, so that we would mail them devices so they could actually use the video to talk to their doctor. So I offer all of this as, again, this pandemic has been tough on all of us, but the silver linings really are incredible and what we've learned about our customers and how we can help their whole health.
Yeah, and I've conducted several interviews over the course of the last 12 months in this setting, and the one I look for the silver linings like yourself, and to the person that I've interviewed, including me and everybody, it's what we've learned too. I think is a huge benefit, and I hope really continues to drive things forward in a positive manner. I couldn't agree more. Antonio, a little bit, for you as well, and maybe answer the same question, but I'd also maybe contextually as it relates to open innovation, which is often so driven by getting people together and coming to an experience center, and the startups mix in with the VCs and mix in with the academics, and you're all there together. So I just kind of top line, what have you learned in the last year? And then specifically around open innovation, how did you manage that remotely? How do you manage open innovation remotely and not getting everybody together?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I would be a bit foolish if I had a concrete response with confidence. But echoing some of Heather's comments, I think it begins first and foremost that you acknowledge that geographic location has been compartmentalized and put to the side. We're in front of a variety of devices simultaneously, not only to conduct business and to help our members and our associates, but also to interact socially with any number of people who you're not interacting with on a daily basis in person. And acknowledging this heightened state of social inequity in our country over the past 12 months, as Heather was suggesting, and these are my own perspectives, so forgive me in advance, but I think that the notion of vulnerability is strength as applied to leadership, and just really acknowledging a host of different dynamics that are going on in people's lives, no matter who they were, right? Whether it was an associate or a member or a provider of care, and just as leaders, our ability to not only acknowledge that, but to basically share our own fear and insecurity and lack of confidence in the path forward, and nonetheless demonstrating optimism and confidence in a path forward together. And I think the notion of togetherness really matters. Now, changing the nature of the response to the other aspect of your conversation relative to, how does social distancing, shelter in place, a global pandemic impact the ability to really what we used to term as a co-creative pursuit of, delivering services and products that, again, are relevant and helpful to people. It was a challenge. Whereas, back in the day, we brought people into Studio H, our Boston-based innovation hub, or our Louisville-based experience center located there at Humana's headquarters. We had become accustomed to bringing in a host of members or partners, as you were suggesting. And, it became increasingly clear that unlike our previous ability of really getting into the flow of co-creating things, that you have to be very intentional about carving off specific time in advance with people and being overtly clear about, how do we make best use of this precious time we have in common, knowing that it's limited and far more linear or binary. The notion of the organic collaboration that would occur on the floor of the studio, we're optimistic that we'll return to that, but that dynamic in this moment is a memory. So I do appreciate that.
And I want to build just quickly on sort of the open innovation point. And Heather, we talked about this in our prep call, and then I'll come to the consumer trust issue and dive into the data. But while we're talking about open innovation, we did a series of conferences on open innovation, and the term innovation theater came up quite a bit. Through your experiences, even places like Citi, there are different labs and accelerators. I know you've had some experience with this. What's your recommendation to folks that are not only running these labs and accelerators, but also the people that are at corporate and transferring that knowledge and not having innovation theater? So what's developed in the lab does turn into real world product and or services that affect, the top and bottom line of the company. And it's not just, hey, we've got this cool lab over here and it's good for a press release and all that. But what have you learned in regards to getting true innovation out of the lab and to turn it into meaningful products or services for the company?
Yeah, listen, that is an ongoing challenge, but I'll tell you, I've learned a lot over the last 8-9 years on what it takes to really kind of push some of these pieces forward. But I would start with a few things. One, you've got to have senior leadership, right, with core sponsorship for the overall body of work, right? Not just specifically the lab or a specific use case, but the actual kind of what does digital transformation mean for this company and what are we going to do differently as a result? So we have that at Humana with our CEO, Bruce Broussard, as well as my colleagues on the management team. So this is, reports into the CEO. It's seen as extremely important for the company, and we need to be leaning in, and we're going to make an investment in this area. One, two, you see things like what Antonio referred to as Studio H, where we're making real investment in acquiring new talent in great geographies where you can attract that talent, but also with a bend toward, hey, this looks and feels different than a healthcare company or an insurance company. People will come in and they say, wow, I feel like I'm working in a tech company, right? So there's a whole element of how you create the right environment, have the right sponsorship. But I think one of the keys that has been most helpful is really making sure you have line of business sponsorship and forcing people to come sit side by side with you, that I need a sponsor to come sit with us, work with us, be the business representative. Because so often what I find is it's the not invented here problem, that even if it's a great solution, if business teams didn't have the right input or weren't engaged at the right level, they don't feel ownership and they feel absolutely nothing about the product or service. And it doesn't matter if it can help, right? So getting that sponsorship one way or another is really critical. And it takes one person, right? Embed one person in. But one, you can learn to be a better bridge into the business, but two, you're going to get that sponsorship, that buy-in. And, part of the joy I have with the work that we're doing at Humana right now, and digital health broadly, and the Experience Center being a great example, we're able to get real work to scale. And that's the hardest part for all of us people on the cutting edge, right? Can never get it to scale. And so that's, if you want to do that, make sure you're spending the time, energy, and sometimes it can be you're running into a brick wall every day. You got to get back up and run back into the wall. Get that sponsorship, get that commitment, and you will start to see the way that you can impact the real world outcomes.
It's great. And Antonio, I'd love your perspective on this from the perspective, I suppose, of, so what Heather said, Heather has a champion in the CEO, Heather's a champion for you as well. So you have those two champions. So there's not really an issue of whether there's a champion up at corporate. What do you recommend for the startups that you work with, or even some people who come in from academics, and at what stage should they be coming in with their products? So it's something that you can pretty easily get up the chain and transfer that knowledge and that value. So how are you managing the experience in a way where you're not spending a lot of time sort of dealing with either ideas that may be too early stage, getting in there, and you'll still do a little work, sure, in advance of it going all the way up to corporate. But what's your advice for the people that you work with, your partners?
That's a great question. I appreciate it. And two things to begin with. And, one would be, and, I had the pleasure of being exposed to a panel at an MIT conference recently on digital health startups. And, what's becoming increasingly clear is that these early stage companies that really do have a bright partnership opportunity with large institutions like Humana.
Right.
Of course, you begin with your initial, opportunity or problem frame, or, demographic use case, whatever your area of orientation, may be. But I think that the startups that prove to be relevant and potent and good partners are those who really have an extensible technology design pattern, as well as a cloud native technology footprint, such that they are designing and building not only to create value and impact relative to the initial opportunity or problem frame, but rather the DNA of the tech and the DNA of the company is predicated on learning and can quickly adapt to secondary or tertiary adjacencies. And those really are the kinds of, partners that we need in the digital health ecosystem that, we're trying to instantiate, because, as you're implying with the question, it's completely untenable and not desirable for us within Humana to go after everything or to custom build everything ourselves. Right. It really is stoking, cultivating, a platform-based ecosystem and getting partners native to the platform to really draw upon and address the scale that is required, when you have, among the largest Medicare Advantage lives in the country.
Yeah. And
hey,
in
Drew.
regards to, and I think, data, just a few minutes left, and I want to be sure we talk about data here, because it's such a core part of both of your jobs. Heather, if you could explain a little bit for those who may not be aware of the laws that were passed and what the new sort of these data accessibility laws mean, and who has access to it now that maybe didn't before, like do I, as just the average person, can I have access? And then, but in the context also then of what does that mean for your business, and what does that mean for the opportunities that your company has, and then the industry wide, because it's about interoperability too, right? So
yeah, so let's talk about the CMS Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the rules that they issued a little over, I guess, 18 months ago now, and will go into effect as of July 1 of this year. So super exciting stuff. You don't often hear people say that they're really super excited about what their regulators are doing to them, but I am, because it is setting the new standard for interoperability in healthcare, in particular for Medicare beneficiaries. And so what we will be doing is allowing access. If you as an individual beneficiary want to give approval to a third party, to your provider, to your insurance company, to say, hey, I want my information transferred, we as the insurance company now have to be able to provide up to 5 years, if you have a history that long, of your data across things like labs and claims and and health records. And so we've got 15 different APIs that we have built so that we can respond to when consumers give consent for their data to be moved. And we've tested it and it's working. We've got a few key partners who are working with us, and we can talk a little bit more about that too. It's called Humana Data Exchange. I'll just put that out there and we'll talk about it later. But we have the opportunity now to create real portability of your healthcare records. And so we're also looking not only to comply with the rule, but Antonio's team leading the charge here has really turned compliance and productized it. And so that we're going to have consumer facing products for available. So if you think about certain watches that you might wear, and maybe you could get your entire health record loaded onto that watch, just like you can, and for some specific companies, we will now be able to add things like your claims, which is a whole new game. We'll also be able to fulfill your wishes with third-party applications. If there's cool new services where you want to integrate your healthcare information into it, you can. We've got a company we've been partnering with as an example, where if they get consent from a Humana beneficiary, we're able to give them the health records so that they can determine whether that person can join a clinical trial. So there's all kinds of new opportunities for us to leverage this data. And I'm super excited about it. I think it's going to change the game for how you think about the products that you want to buy, how you shop for those products, and how we help you find the best fit, the right program for you. And so I think it's going to become much more consumer driven in healthcare over the next several years as this starts to take hold.
That's great. And per Heather's point, Antonio, how is this affecting you? I know you're leading the charge here, and I guess, not only, what do you see happening here, and what are you excited about as it relates to the data laws, but I'd also love your thoughts on, just privacy. And you're working with AI, you're working with data. These are all great things. These are all exciting things. They can also be scary things, particularly as it relates to health information, which is very personal to consumers. So I'd love just maybe your overview on the great opportunities that are ahead, but also some of the challenges that you're still aware of as you noodle around in the lab with these very powerful technologies.
Be happy to provide a perspective. Not only with what has been normalized during COVID-19 relative to, application of digital tools to healthcare. I'll give my own example is that, March of last year, right before the pandemic, I started a physical therapy routine. Pandemic hit, and I was able to, do it with my therapist through the same mechanisms we're using now, from the comfort of my home. And what was very interesting was, I was able to walk her around my house and show her, well, how do I use a guitar? How do I stand at my desk? Am I carrying heavy objects, et cetera? And really the insight that my therapist had into the context, in which I'm residing, that could inform my therapy routine, which then of course she helped me through for a number of months, was categorically different than when I had physical therapy on site, there a few years ago. So, you just begin to wonder about that. Now, that coupled with social determinants, simply put, the notion of what being healthy is, I believe in the last year, 18 months has categorically broadened and changed. And, when we think about data and we think about large tech, Apple aside, of course, there is, ongoing narrative in the media about, surveillance systems, privacy, trust, reselling data. And, your points are well taken that the application of augmented intelligence can also be, Big Brother and scary, or William, whatever the case may be. But by the same token, when you look at how people interact with digital and give away data attributable to them for free, they do so because they perceive they're getting value in exchange. So the opportunity, simply put, is to be overtly clear to people that we seek to partner with you and use data attributable to you. And here is the value exchange. And here is our ethics promise. And here is our trust promise.
Right.
That's number two, because in fact, we think, over the course of time, giving people agency and control and transparency and also synthesis. Because of course, you can imagine if you just think about claims data alone, that's not necessarily relevant or meaningful to a
Yeah.
layperson who's not an insider like Heather and I.
I agree. Thank you for that. And I'm getting the messages that we are just about at time here. So we'll probably see David pop on here, which is the subtle hint. But Heather, I'd like to just wrap very briefly with you, kind of 30 seconds or less, what Antonio has been talking about and what you talked about coming from financial services and trust. And this is really key for a company like Humana and any company in the health space, really, regardless of whether you're an insurance, a provider, the health systems. Tell us what you learned, very, very briefly from the financial services industry about consumer trust and how you're applying that to the company you're at and how your industry needs to be sure to focus on that with consumers moving forward.
Yeah, the trust piece is critical. And, I think as we find some of these new kind of ways to engage with members, leveraging data and analytics and digital tools and getting smarter about the next best action, right? So that right now, today, the analog or the real world way that healthcare is delivered, it's very siloed. And the data, you're the one person who can move that information probably in your head or on your notes from one place to another. And tomorrow, what we can do is actually use the data that we gather from the signals that you've created with that interaction, create the next best action, let that be digital or move you back to physical, and we can start to create that ecosystem of information for you and allow you to be empowered to go have the fulsome conversation with all the data at your fingertips, but also be having the knowledge of where to go next, not having to go search for it, pull up the yellow pages and literally search, right? So I think that's the opportunity we have, is to create more interactions in healthcare, more interactions with your PCPs, your primary care physicians, your care teams, and to really deepen that level of the relationship so that you can get to trust. And when we can get to trust, then we can actually create the next level of products and services. And that's what we've seen in other industries. So that's the opportunity. But one last thing we have to be careful of, the privacy, the security you've talked about, but we also have to be really careful in healthcare. And as we start to approach this augmented intelligence application at scale, we can't let bias creep in, right? Because if bias creeps in, we then create health disparities. And that's the downside. The upside is we can also use things like natural language processing to find the nuggets of information that could be really helpful about your care. So be balanced.
Indeed. Well, thanks to both of you. I hope we get to do this in person sometime soon. We'll see you at an Economy or CDX conference soon. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.